I don't know. I must have chased off. We had a couple of new people, I think, last week, but they maybe they got scared. Maybe they'll come. They were a little bit late last time. In any case, we are still we are at the Festival of Booths, and so I went over what the Festival of Booths was. We're in chapter 7. I'll note, I noted this is a long time ago because we are at session 64. So we're going to continue to move unless you guys start complaining about the speed of movement, because I think we're at least progressing in a reasonable fashion. But if you can remember back to class 1 or 2 when I go over the historical basis, and I told you that I went over kind of an outline, a classical outline of the book of John. And I noted, I think I even gave you notes about it, and there's a couple of ways that it has been outlined and looked at. One of them is as a book of signs, semeion, which is probably the most reasonable and most accurate way to look at it. I call it the ego eimi book, and I would say the outline of ego eimi is really the classical way to look at this book, this gospel, this ancient work. The other way to look at it is as the Jewish festivals. Did you notice? One of the first points was Passover, right? And I don't have it all memorized. I should probably make a little outline of that too, but it's been outlined. If you go look at classical outlines of the book of John, you'll see some of them are listed in semeion, some are listed the signs, some are listed in the festivals. And it's a cohesive type of way of looking at John. How was John organized? I think it's organized by the ego eimi statements, because those, okay. The signs get us excited. Why? You read a novel, and how many miracles or signs do you see in a novel or in history or whatever? We don't in modern history. How many festivals? Our whole church life is bound by festivals. But do we really regulate our lives based on festivals? Or maybe Christmas and Thanksgiving, right? When the kids come. Yeah. But still, the festivals are more secular in nature than religious in nature. So we don't really manage our lives that way. The Greeks in the ancient world did festivals because that's when they got meat. That was great, right? And the semeion, the miracles, the signs would be really important for organizing. However, I want to point out this to you. This is what people tell me all the time. People who are not familiar with ancient literature, and I know most people are not familiar with ancient literature. I've probably read every piece of ancient literature in Greek, in Latin, and in most other languages. I've read them. If I can do Greek, I can't do Latin, I have to get in translation. I can't do a lot of the other ancient texts, I have to get in translation, but I read them all. And I can tell you, people who say, there are miracles in the Bible. You go, well, there's miracles in Julius Caesar. There's miracles in Augustus. There's miracles in Augustine. There's miracles in Pliny. There's miracles in Thales. There's miracles in all ancient literature. You hear what I said? There's miracles in all ancient literature. Today we don't know that because how many of us read ancient literature? I mean, at the very worst or the best, in a class someone might say, well, in Pliny the Younger, there's this text. No, they don't. They don't even tell you that. They just may mention a book and that's it. They don't tell you what's in it, and you never read it. And of course, no one's reading Greek and Latin anymore, or even studying it. So my point is simply this. What would the Greeks even, to the Greeks, semeion and the idea of miracles was more common than it is to us. The idea of the festivals was common to them, but what was uncommon to them is the ego eimi statements. So I'll argue, and we'll see more of them, and the outlines, we'll see them they're put together. But in any case, we have Jesus. He has gone to the Festival of Booths. He had snuck in, and they were looking for him because they knew, even though he told his brothers and his sisters not his brethren, but his actual brothers and sisters, that he wasn't going. He did go. And then we're up to 12. So among the crowds, this is an idea, among the crowds was the widespread whispering about him. Some said he is a good man. Others replied, no, he deceives the people. I'm not sure where they got some of this in their translation. The King James says, and there was much murmuring among the people concerning him, for some said he's a good man, others said, nay, he deceiveth the people. And here's what the Greek says. Let me get this in a little better. There's Kai. Kai's easy in Greek. And gongismos. Gongismos. It says a grumbling. I didn't. In some cases, when we get brand new verbs, I like to put them under the translations to see exactly what the verbs mean. We don't need to with this one. Gongismos. You can almost get it. In some ways, a lot of this Greek English has similar kind of things. But gongismos means grumbling. Periol over through of him. And was, this is an identity verb, and like I said, these are rare in most ancient Greek literature, but it's very common in John. Much, many, in the oikos, throngs, the men. We have amen, right, which means an affirmation. Men is indicative of an affirmation or concession. It's a lesser strength to amen, but it is not of Greek origin. It's Hebrew origin. Men. Elegon, they were making a logical argument, hoti, that because agos, good, he is. Aloi, other. They, but elejon were making a logical argument, hoi, no or not. Allah, other thing. Contrariwise, he causes to roam the throng. Let's see. Aloi is similar. It's a bita-form verb. So it's a bita-form thing. And I won't go into the whole bita-form thing, but in bita cultures, which Greek is warrior cultures, Anglo-Saxon is a bita culture. I will. I'll mention it. German is a bita culture. All the Germanic cultures are bita cultures. The Greeks are a bita culture. The Romans are not. Romantic languages are not. What does that mean? In English, we have I's. We have singular, right? I. We have singular he and her and it and she. Well, yeah, not accusative. Okay, the nominative form. Okay, we're using nominative form here. Anyway, we also have plural form. In bita cultures, there is a bita form. It's called bita. Bita means two. We have one remnant in English. It's both. Both means two. There used to be a whole verb form, a pronoun verb form in English and in Anglo-Saxon and in German, and it also used to exist in Greek, called the bita form for two together. Why? It wasn't husband and wife. It was your bud. It was your warrior. It was your warrior, your shield warrior. It was the person that was with you in your culture that protected your right side, your right-hand man, right? Right-hand man.
Wingman.
Wingman. You're a wingman, yes. Yes.
Go both ways, though.
What's it?
You got one that's got the shield, and you got the other.
Well, you both had a shield, but you were dependent on each other for protection. So yes, but your right-hand guy was your best bud ever because he shielded you on the right hand. And usually, your right-hand guy is slightly subordinate. This gets really complicated. So if you want to study bita culture, not many people have written much about bita culture, which is really weird to me because it was a whole verb form. It's a whole pronoun verb form in English. Anyway, you'll find remnants in languages that have had in the past this warrior thing. The most important thing to recognize, though, is bita culture is huge. We don't talk about it in our thing, but you know what? Does everybody want to have friends?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody want to have best friends, right?
BFFs.
Bita culture is what allows that idea. In Roman culture, people did not, in Roman and Romance cultures, people really don't have friends in the same fashion as you have in Bible. Now, there has been huge interweaving of cultures, right? So you can't say, like you could in the past, for example, this whole culture excluded a certain means of friendship, or this culture, but we've even seen how language, you got to be really careful, ladies and gentlemen. If you think that love means love like you think love means love in other cultures, it does not. It cannot. Cultural differences in what love means is huge. Do you think there's a cultural difference in what friendship means? It's huge. It's huge. We don't know about it because no one tells us. Now, if you're in special operations, special missions, we talk about it because it's a cultural thing and you want to be very cautious. Very cautious. In certain cultures, it's very common if you're friends, they want to hold your hand. Most guys will go, ah, 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 ah. In a lot of cultures, their buddies, they want to kiss your cheek or kiss you. Just saying, okay? In our culture, we're a beta culture. We want people to be our best friends. We don't mind a little hugging sometimes, but the kissing and the holding hands for guys, especially right out. And the ladies, I know ladies are, young, especially, teens or whatever. This is cool. And this is how, sometimes cultures get messed up. Because if you have mixed cultural signals, right? Especially if you have somebody in your cultural system that begins to interpret cultural signals differently than your culture does. Do you notice what I'm talking about here? This happens. Anyway, so just a quick one about it, but this is a beta word, and here's a translation in the cultural translation. And all over many were grumbling about him in the throngs. Indeed, they were making a logical argument that he is good. But others were making a logical argument, no, contrariwise, he causes the throng to roam. There's more to this, we're going to get into it. But no one would say anything publicly about him for fear of the leaders. They say leaders. And by the way, is there whispering in here? There was whispering. Now, the King James used murmuring, which is pretty close to grumbling. In English, I don't know if you knew this, but in English, how many words do you have in choices of not just synonyms, similar words that have different meanings, but they're similar, right? Yeah, there's 1 million words in English, and I get the word of the day, and I write about this all the time. Some of the words of the day you can't use. Don't ever use them in anything because they're not. If people read them, they would have to go to a dictionary, and some of them are unfindable in a dictionary. So anyway, don't use them. But some words in English, and usually the good ones, are the ones when you go, was it Shift F7? That's Shift F7 in Word. The thesaurus. It's great. You get all the word choices so you can pick, right? So yeah, grumbling, murmuring, close, whispering, not so much. Anyway, remember, Greek is a great language for us because it's limited vocabulary. It has about 20,000 words. And by the way, most of us have about 15 to 20,000 words in our vocabulary, and that's all we got. You can expand it a little bit, but what do? You expand a word a day, so you get 1 word a day. That's not going to give you a whole lot. Anyway. But no one was saying about him biblically for the fear of the leaders. Let's see what that says in the Greek. Here's the Greek, and here's the transliteration of the Greek. I don't dwell too much on the Greek. If we need to, we can go back and look at it, because even though I might give you the Greek thing, if you don't know what phi and you don't know all the Greek letters Z, you're done. Anyway, howbeit no man spake openly of him for fear of the Jews. Odious, not even one. Menthoi, indeed through, however, parisia. That's the interesting word I told you. Parisia, John used it a lot. It means in Greek all outspokenness. Some people put different meanings in it, but that's what it means, is outspokenness. Was uttering words, and here You know, logos means to make a logical argument. Here we have elei. That's lelo, right? Lelo. He was uttering words through all over of him, dia through the phobon, alarm or fright of the Judeans. Now, I told you before, I translate the word just like it is in the Greek. The Greek does not translate this leaders. Oh man, where'd they get leaders from? It's the Judeans belonging to Judah, right? Remember I showed you the map last week. We saw where the area of Judah was, you know, according to the Romans, and that area of control by the Romans in the four tetrarchs. Yeah, the tetrarchs, and that there's a name for it, whatever. Anyway, the areas. But I do not translate it as Jews. I translate it as Judeans. That's what it is in the Greek. So that way we don't, that way we're not applying a negative, because it's not the Jews. Who is it? It's the people of Judah, who include Samaritans, Greeks, Romans, other hangers, other peoples, right? So this is not a cultural group. This is a national nations group, city-state group, belonging to Judah. And by the way, I got to mention this. I got to mention it. There are no nation states, right? We got nations, we got states, we have cities. There are city-states, and there are territories under control of groups. Judah happens, remember there's the tetrarchs, they're the four areas we saw. Originally, they were all under the control of a king, Herod the Great. When Herod croaked, the Romans were really smart. They divided it into four tetrarchs, tetracy, whatever. Anyway, they divided them into four areas so they could control the areas through the kings, and their division is kings. There's also the Decapolis area, which is a Greek area that I showed you on the map that is not, it is not really under the control of the Romans. Romans are not idiots. The Romans are really smart guys. What do you not want to do when you control an empire?
Make the people mad.
Well, you definitely don't want to make the people mad, but
you want to do it halfway.
You don't want to do it halfway. You want to control the area you control, because what do you get from them? Tribute. Yeah, remember the taxes? They didn't ask about taxes. They said, should we pay tribute to Caesar? So tribute. So you get tribute, and how do you get the tribute? The tribute is done mostly through the civil authorities who are backed by the legions. Legions are military. There is no policing. There's no police forces in the ancient world. You really don't want military policing anything. What does the military do best? Keep them destroy things. That's their purpose. So when the legion gets called, what's going to happen? Nothing good is going to happen with the legions that get called. See, okay, you'll love this picture. It's really true. In Germany, the police officers all have the equivalent of bachelor's degrees in criminology. They also all carry automatic weapons. They're literally kind of like the Gestapo. So when you have a car accident or a car infraction or some kind of thing in Germany, guess who appear? The German police, Polizei, come into the car and they get out and they're carrying automatic weapons. They used to have Uzis. I think they're carrying other types now, probably Heckler and Koch. Anyway, they got really nice automatic weapons. So I've seen this happen. When I lived in Germany, I see it. You know, the Germans were like, they're almost at fisticuffs. They're about ready to fight. The German Polizei come up and they just kind of get out. And what do the people do? The two guys go, ha! Everything is okay. Alles gut, alles gut. You know, why? Because the police are really, they're not necessarily, they're very courteous, they're very nice, but they're carrying deadly weapons, and they don't, okay.
Well, unless it's like immigrants from Muslim nations that they let run rampant all over Cologne or something.
That Yeah, you're right. And the thing is, the German people tend to be very necessarily obedient to authority, right? It's kind of in their culture. But I'm just saying, and you know what? You're right. Things have changed. It's kind of like American.
Things have changed.
Things have changed a little bit. But let's just say back when I lived there in the 80s, when Tammy and I lived in the 80s, you know, if you had a little traffic altercation, you know, and the Polizei appeared, they didn't even have to say a word. Everybody backed off. Everybody was nice to each other. It was a happiness situation. And then the one officer would go to one guy and give me your statement. The other officer would go to the other guy, give me your statement. Perfect, right? That's the way it worked. Anyway, that's good policing. Hopefully they're not beating on, they didn't beat on people. I'd say this too. When I was in Germany, when I was flying with the Germans, we would trade. So you'd have the Germans trade, you know, with you for search and evasion. So they'd throw you out someplace in your flight suit in a village and say, you punched out of your airplane, and now you'd see posters with your face on it that said, you know, we're looking for this aviator, you know, they're maybe armed and dangerous, use caution, call the police. And then the people would catch you. If the people didn't catch you, you know, they'd be running from you. And the police would eventually get you and they'd like take you in. Well, the Americans, they weren't supposed to hit you or harm you. The Germans didn't care. The German Polizei just, you know, give you a little, knock you around a little bit, you know, put you in chains, put you freezing in your underwear up against the wall, you know, good cop, bad cop. They did all the stuff they talked about, but our guys were not allowed to do. They didn't hurt you. They didn't bruise you too much. But let's just say they weren't gentle with you. But that was back in the Soviet, you know, the Soviet era, when we were in a Cold War, and we expected the Russians to come across the border at any moment, and they really played the game like it was real, right? So anyway, I just had to point that out. This is a cultural thing, but it's the way it is. So you do not want the legions. If you're having a petty dispute, don't call the legions. It could be bad for you. Anyway, here's a translation of this. Indeed, though not even one was uttering words with all outspokenness about him, through the alarm of the Judeans. Now remember, this is a pilgrim festival. Why does it matter about the Judeans? Who's here at the pilgrim festival?
Everyone.
Everyone. As a matter of fact, Jesus, his brothers and his sisters, at least his brothers, are all there. Why? The men had to come to the pilgrim festivals. So it's not just Judeans, it's all Jews, all Jewish people. And do you think there's Samaritans there too? Yeah, they're not supposed to be allowed to have teruma, but you think they're there? Yeah, they're there. Others are there. Yes, sir, Jeff.
I'm just thinking, doesn't that kind of create the outlying areas where the women and children didn't come to the festival? Now they're kind of unprotected.
Yeah. Very good point. The thing that's interesting about this, in my book, I talk about it. The Romans are really smart. A legion is very large. And I wish I could remember all the groupings, but you have centuries, which are about 80 guys. Century means 100, but there's really 80. And they have, like, they're very similar to our squad structure with a platoon and a squad structure. And then I try to remember, but I think there's 10 centuries in a, I've got it in my book, all through my book. Anyway, what the legions did is, number one, a legion is large, very large. It's got over about 10, about 10 to about 10, at least 1,000 people, at least 1,000. There's actually more than that, depending on how it's marked. So there's a lot in a legion. What happens when you bring that many people subservient to government entity for feeding and everything else into an area, you'll swamp it, right? You got starvation culture, you got more starvation culture. So what do you really want to do with your legions? You want to divide them up. Usually they put two of the groups of, you have, I think it's 10 centuries. Look back at my notes. I think it's 10 centuries in one, and you have 10 of these in a legion. The two top ones, or the top one, are double legions, or double centuries. Anyway, the point is, you would put 2 and 2. So in my book, I told, and I did a lot of research to get this, reading in the Greek and the Latin. So I have 2 up in the Tiberian region that are a specific cutoff from the legion that is overseeing that area. And then I have 2 in Jerusalem. I have 2 up in Syria. So the legion has divided itself into manageable units that are keepable in an area without starving the people out. So who was providing the support for the people? The legions. Now, everyone said the legions and the Romans are evil, but what did the legions and the Romans allow the people to be able to do? Go to a pilgrim festival. Because would you just leave your family, right? No, that would be really bad. The best you do is take them with you. And then what's going on at your farm, right?
Pillaging.
Yeah.
You better hope, well, and they're a pillaging culture, so they should feel good about that, right? Hell, thank you, right? Hey, that's my grandmother's heirloom. Oh, well, I just picked it up, right? That's the way it works. So, I'm just telling you the dynamics to us. You got to think, and that is great thinking, because that is absolutely what was happening. And you see that, and like I said, generally we don't get this unless you read a book about it or you have some other knowledge about it. Even then, people say, oh yeah, they went to the pilgrim festivals. Oh yeah? Really? There's a reason why they might not go to the pilgrim festival. Luckily at this time, the Romans had provided stability and they could, and they safely do it. So anyway, there's a lot. Remember I told you at the Passover, we believed there was 1 million people in Jerusalem. We think that at each pilgrim festival, there was 1 million people in Jerusalem. Jerusalem was normally about 20,000. So it went from 20,000 to 1 million, which is great for tourist travel and making some bucks, but not so great for a lot of other things. And they didn't have stupid rules like we do. You can't, what's those rules? You can't charge people more, right?
Oh, you're price gouging.
You can't price, well, it's not price gouging, it's reality gouging.
That's what they call it. But.
Yeah, it's silly. If you got 1 million people coming into Wichita for a game thing, wouldn't you want to jack your prices up a little bit? Yeah, make some money, because what? They got food? Just saying. Capitalism is destroyed by the influence of bad, and the Romans weren't stupid, so they knew what was going on. Anyway, not until halfway through the festival did Jews go up to the temple courts and begin to teach. And I leave in the NIV little notey things there. Ooh, that's come together. Now, about the midst of the feast, Jesus went up into the temple and taught. Even now, but the horses of the festival, mesuis, forming the middle, and Nebe, he went up, Jesus, into the sacred place and was teaching. Didaskin was teaching. But even now, in the middle of the festival, Jesus went up to the sacred place and was teaching. There is no, Herion means a sacred place. There is, yes, it is a temple, but a sacred place it's a Greek word. It can mean a temple, it can mean the Delphi, it can mean an oracle, it can mean a lot of different things in Greek. Greek's a limited vocabulary language and doesn't need a whole lot because that's the word for that point. So that's why it's a sacred place, but then I put in parentheses temple because that's what they obviously mean. The Jews were amazed and asked, how did this man get such learning without having been taught? And this is a very important concept to us. I've talked about it before. We'll go over it a little bit. And the Jews marveled, saying, how knoweth this man letters, having never learned? They were wondering, certainly or clearly, the Judeans, logotes, so we're making a logical argument. In what way or how much he, sheer, it, hotos, grammata, writings, learning, he sees with physical eyes, not or least, mimatikos, he having learned, mimatikos, math. Woohoo, mimatikos. That's pretty cool, huh? He having learned. Accordingly, the Judeans were wondering. They're making a logical argument. In what way he sees writings with physical eyes, he having not learned. And this is really important. In the English translation, you know, they love to translate this oiden as knowing. That's coolio, but that's not what it means at all. And I've been through this before. I'll just remind you, this word means to see with physical eyes. It means knowing in the way, okay, when we say I know, that is super euphemistic. How do you know? You might say, well, I read it in a book. I read it in a book. You might say, I learned it in a class. You might say, I saw it. You might say, my mama told me. You might say, my daddy told me. You might say, in the Greek is very specific. So the point is that he sees with physical eyes, meaning, how did he know it? He knew it experientially, okay? Now, you could say that's slightly euphemistic because in the Greek, he sees with physical eyes can also mean perception. It can mean I touched it, I smelled it, I felt it, right? But the point is that you physically experienced it. I'm going to talk about this because this is really, really, really important.
Is that like having authority, being a subject matter expert in a sense?
Yes, no, maybe so. I think it'll become exactly obvious when we get to the point. Let's talk about this point here. And I got some notes here, but every Hebrew guy, okay, how often do people see a book or a scroll? There's no books. No books. Books have not invented. Books were invented as codexes by who invented the book? Christians, so they could carry the New Testament around. So they invented codexes. They call them codexes. But the book was invented originally. I have to go back to this because this is so good. This is one of my favorite subjects in the whole world. I even have taught classes about this specific subject. In the ancient world, we've never found them, but we believe that the Egyptians and possibly others, but we know the Egyptians did it. We believe that the Samaritans, remember the guys who did the press the stuff into clay? Sumerians, Phoenicians, Sumerians. Okay, there's two writings that were two people invented proto-writing. The Egyptians and the Phoenicians, Sumerians, or whatever, those guys, Sumerians. They invented it. The one group did it originally with chiseling and with writing on generally stone. They wrote on stone, they wrote on papyrus. The other group did not have papyrus, they didn't have stone, they used mud. And so they marked it. And what do you call cuneiform? Yeah. We put cuneiform into it. Okay, we know we found cuneiform stacked. So cuneiform sheets, okay, cuneiform sheets stacked in a box. Why? Keep them in order, right? What happens when your scribe dumps blocks?
They all shatter, but.
Well, remember when Moses brought down the first tablets were made of clay. He stumbled. No, he threw them at him and hit him in the head. And he broke the tablets, right? And the second time he brought them down, they were stone, much more difficult to break. Interesting, right? We believe, we've not found it because it's so ancient, but we believe that the ancient Egyptians did the same thing with paper. So to keep the paper, they would have a box, a little cubby or a box, and they would put the paper down. Last sheet first, next sheet next. So that way when you read the orders, reports, the story, whatever, then you would go page to page until your scribe dropped it. They had not invented pagination, writing on the page, the number. They had not invented a lot of stuff. So how they solve this problem? Make a scroll. Hard to make scrolls with cuneiform tablets. Very easy to make scrolls with paper products. So the first great invention in the world for writing was making a scroll. Now, how many scrolls did people ever see?
Very few.
Very few. I've told you before, the library, the great library, what was the library at Alexandria? The Great Library of Alexandria may have had 100 works. The average library in the ancient world had 7. Until the printing press, the average library in all of the world had 7 works. That's it. So how often did people see books or scrolls? Almost never. Now, who kept the scrolls? Who was supposed to always have a copy of a scroll? No, the priest could not read. The scribes just copied stuff. It was
They read the stuff out loud, right?
maybe. No, I doubt it. The priest, we don't know how educated the priest might have been. But let's think about it based on the information I'm going to give you. Who had scrolls? The rabbis owned scrolls. The rabbis usually owned them themselves or the synagogue, right? Synagogue is Greek. It's not Hebrew. It's not Aramaic. Synagogue is Greek. And remember, who was the head of the synagogue in Capernaum? Jesus. Now, supposedly every synagogue had a Torah scroll. How much do Torah scrolls cost? How much does Torah scrolls cost today? If you go to Amazon, you can check it out. How much does it cost? Brand new one. $50,000. You know what? The cost was equivalent in the ancient times. You can get a used one for $20,000, but it's probably illegal. It's worn out. Somebody just yanked it and selling it. Because what are you supposed to do with the Torah scroll? After it's copied, right? So that's when the scribes get involved. You hire the scribe does it, $50,000. According to the French ancient literature, the cost of the average book was the same as a 40-acre farm, 40-acre estate, where they make wine. $50,000? Yeah, that's about right? Count by acreage costs. So we know that books were very expensive, scrolls were very expensive. How many synagogues do you think had them? Now, what did you have to do to be considered a man, an adult man in Hebrew culture?
Learn and memorize the Torah.
You had to memorize the Torah because that was what your bar mitzvah was. In the bar mitzvah, a Jewish boy, man, remember, all right, I know you hate hearing this, but it's absolutely true. You got to live with this. I know we hate to even talk about this because we got this Victorian thing going on, which is probably good for our culture. But the Jewish rabbis tell us that when a girl is 12 with pubic hair or a boy is 13 with pubic hair. So guess when you did your bar mitzvah? When you were 13 and with pubic hair, and they checked, okay? Of course, in semi-nude cultures, it's not hard to check anyway. But remember, this is not a semi-nude culture. Who is? The Greeks are. The Hebrews keep their clothes on all the time, probably way too much, and they never bathe, and it's really gross, except for the mikvah, which is not a bath, it's a purification ritual. So anyway.
So the priests just memorized, they didn't actually read, or they had it by memory, they didn't read the scroll.
Almost all the priests, I would say, probably went to synagogue school. And in the synagogue school, if they had the Torah scroll, which I would say that most of them saved and scrimped for generations to be able to buy a Torah scroll. And by then it was worn out. I hope they paid it in increments, right? You're paid by what, 10%? Whatever. No, that was illegal in the Hebrew culture. Anyway, the point is this. every child was supposed to, every boy was supposed to memorize the Torah, the entire Torah. And how did he do it? This goes back to the Greek learning versus Hebrew learning. In Hebrew learning, the rabbi sat on the floor with the Torah scroll. Where were his disciples, his learners?
Looking over his shoulder.
They were behind him, looking over his shoulder, and he would have a marker. And what they call that? It's a marker they use even now in the synagogues. But he would put it under. You don't touch the scrolls. Don't touch the scrolls. Not with your bare hands. You would touch them with this little marker, and you would put it under each letter. There is no vowels. They're only consonants. And he would clearly pronounce the words. By the way, remember, is there any spaces? Punctuation? Sentences? Paragraphs? Markings of any kind? No. You have no idea. You memorize the whole thing. You memorize the intonations. You memorize the pronunciations. Because by the time of Jesus, Hebrew was a dead language. People did not speak the language. The only place you heard it was when you got in the synagogue. It was read. It had to be read properly. Even today, it's illegal for you to read a Masoretic text. The Masoretic text has the pointlets, the vowel pointlets. It's illegal to read that. You have to read the Torah scrolls with the consonants only. No spaces, no anything. And you memorize them. You memorize them by looking over the back, the shoulder, and you went, I think they said they started when they're 5 or 8 or something like that, but you had basically 4 or 5 years to memorize the whole thing. And then you got your chance. Now, how you do it today and how they did it there probably is very similar. You made sure you really knew the part that you were supposed to do for your bar mitzvah, right? Because you didn't want to flop that up, right? But you had 2 helpers too. Do you know that? In a synagogue today, there are 2 helpers. The reader stands in the center with the Torah scroll open to the correct point. There are 2 readers. He takes the pointers and goes, and the 2 readers beside him are his helpers. They read it. If you get you get to a word, you're like stumbling.
Prompters.
They're prompters. Yeah. And you got 2 of them. Why do you have 2 of them? To make sure it's right? Because if you did, okay. I know. We don't care. If our pastor stumbles on a thing, that's not considered a crisis. In the ancient world, if you stumble over a sacred text, it could be considered really bad. We don't have that sense. Now, I suspect they gave you a little bit of grace, but maybe not. Maybe they slapped you around, right? Maybe 2 prompters, 2 hands, right? Go back. Yes, sir.
Just to clarify, because I think I ask this every time, they didn't stand up and close their eyes and just start from the first letter and say the Torah scrolls from memory. They were taught how to read and know where the inflections are, where the
Breaks are.
everything. So they learned how to read it, but not just say it word for word out of memory.
They're mnemonics. You got to remember this. Ancient writing is all mnemonics. The reason they're mnemonics is because in ancient writing, especially sacred ancient writings, do you want to read it wrong? No, you don't want to get a single jot or tittle. Where have I heard that before? Wrong, right? It has to be correct. Why does that have to be correct? It's sacred. It's the Greeks are the same way. The Greeks are not immune to this. In fact, all ancient cultures are like this. So when you read the works, they're mnemonics. So when you have it memorized, but what do the letters help you do? Remember exactly what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to ignite in your memory. Today we read. Our reading style and technique is the later style and technique that was created by, and I've told you before, it was a learning text in Greek that did it. In ancient Greek, they never separated the words, but they started to do that for learning text, for kids, for the youths, right? Because a scroll slave costs what? $20,000 right? So what are you gonna do? Send a scroll slave with every kid? That's kind of cost prohibitive. I mean, well, I guess we could do it in America today because we're spending $20,000 per kid per year, so everyone could have a scroll slave if they needed one. Look, everybody could not afford a scroll slave. So what you did is you had learning text for the kids. Remember, there's 3 levels: lyceums, shula, and gymnasium. So to learn, they would have text that broke the words out. And guess what? Somebody thought, and we don't know when this happened. We think it may have been the end of the 1st century, may have been the end of the 2nd century. We have no idea. Some bright guy got this idea. Well, paper costs are a little bit lower and costs a little bit lower for text. Why don't we break the words out on everything so that we can read it by ourselves? What a great idea, right? So now you don't have to pay for a scroll slave. You don't have to memorize. It makes it a lot better. Now, the purist said that's bad because you don't know the intonation, you know, the separation. We had to wait, hundreds of years till we got punctuation. But anyway, I'm just saying, we have this situation. How many synagogues you think had Torah scrolls? A lot? A few? Everybody would want one, but can you afford 50,000?
They could.
Yep.
If you didn't have them, how could your
Yeah,
children go through bar mitzvah?
It was the oral, they had to do the oral.
That's right. We'll get to that. What they had to do is they had to memorize it. And if your rabbi had already memorized it, what could he teach you to do? Recite it. So if you didn't own a Torah scroll for your synagogue, which, by the way, all the big synagogues had Torah scrolls because they saved for generations to buy these things, right? So they had them, and that they were treasures. They were absolute treasures for their thing. They put them in arks. You guys, anybody been to a synagogue? Anybody been to an Orthodox church? Where do you keep the gospel? In the tabernacle, in the ark, in the tabernacle. And you in the Orthodox church, the priest goes into it and brings it out into the people, and you walk it into the middle of the group and you read it. In a synagogue, you do something similar. The rabbi goes to the ark, opens the ark, takes out the Torah scroll, puts it on the stand, opens it to the proper position. You have to always do this for everything. And then when they're done reading, what does he do? Rolls it back up, takes it, puts it back in the ark. That's the way you do business because these things are so valuable. Even today, Torah scroll, $50,000. Okay, so some synagogues, I would say probably, and if you read the Arch Code documents, did Jesus have a rabbi with a Torah scroll? Yes, the Arch Code documents said he did. And his rabbi wrote to the Sanhedrin about this guy Jesus, this kid Jesus, who was really, really smart and knew the Torah, like backwards and forwards and forwards and backwards. Interesting. Anyway, so I'm just saying that not everybody had a Torah scroll, but this is the way you were supposed to learn it. And even today, that's the way you're supposed to learn it. Now, once you pass your bar mitzvah, and by the way, this is what Jesus, according to the Arch Code documents, the Arch Code letter, his rabbi at Capernaum, I believe, I can't remember what his rabbi was. Maybe it was in Nazareth. But your rabbi can recommend you. When he recommends you, he gives you a letter. The letter is not necessarily written. It's written to whom it may concern. But it always has the name of the person on the outside of the letter. But you carry a letter, or remember, letters are really expensive. So you can carry it verbally. These get complicated. You guys don't know this because we don't do this today. But you would carry something that belonged to your rabbi to the other rabbi, because that shows what?
Really from him.
It's really from you, right? And you're supposed to tell him the truth. So, according to the rabbi, he sent a letter to the Sanhedrin recommending that Jesus get extra training and I can't remember which rabbi he told them to do, but basically they will tell you to go to a certain rabbi, for example, to Gamaliel, right? The Rabboni of Rabbonis, but whatever, they'll send you one. So obviously Paul's rabbi sent him with either a letter or with a direct thing to Gamaliel, the guy, the rabbi of rabbis, right? And so Jesus was recommended for training. Now, the next level of training, okay, the next level of training is supposed to be you train with a rabbi who knows the Tanakh. And all rabbis are supposed to know Tanakh, okay? All rabbis are supposed to know the Torah, the Tanakh, the Mishnah, and the Talmud. Tammy used to make me put it on all the sheets. I don't have room, so try to remember this. Torah, first 5. Tanakh is the rest, including the Torah. So that's what they call the Nivim, the Ketuvim. That's the prophets and the Psalms. It's everything. The Bible, but what's that? It includes wisdom. It does not include the apocryphal documents. It should, but it doesn't. It did include the apocryphal documents, but those were Greek. Oh no. Anyway, so you would learn from the rabbi by looking over his shoulder, and hopefully he owned all the Tanakh scrolls. Now, the Mishnah and the Talmud are easy. They're not written down. So once you learn the Torah, you're a normal Jewish guy. That was the way you became a Jewish male, mature, right? Then you learn the Tanakh. You memorized it. After you learn the Tanakh, then you learned the Mishnah and the Talmud. The Mishnah is the oral Torah. The Talmud is the conversations, judicial conversations around the Mishnah. Because you can't change the Torah. Can you change the Mishnah? No, you're not supposed to change either, but the Talmud kind of lets you be squishy room. The squishy room, the best squishy room ever. The Torah says you can't travel on the Shabbat. The Mishnah says, well, traveling means that you can walk in your court. You know, your house court, or the court of your barns or your quad. The Talmud says, well, we define a court as what can be surrounded by a rope. So therefore, the whole city of Jerusalem had a what around it? A rope around the whole city of Jerusalem, because that made it a court, and it meant that you were legal to travel in the whole city of Jerusalem on Shabbat, according to Talmud. Now, I don't know if you guys are battlefield lawyers or not, but do you think this is kind of squishy?
That's where the term loophole came from.
No.
Yeah.
There you go. You think this irritated Jesus a little bit? And Jesus is God, right? So Jesus ain't very happy with this, I don't think. Anyway.
No, he made it pretty clear.
He made it pretty clear. So these are the points I'm making here. You know,
But why would it say that he was not, that he was, where did he get the learning without having to study? I mean, obviously he had.
because since every Jewish man would have memorized the Torah, they aren't speaking about the Torah. Every Jewish rabbi would have memorized the Tanakh. So they're not talking about the Tanakh. What they're talking about is the Mishnah and the Talmud, plus the application of the Talmud. Jesus, as a rabbi from Capernaum, would know about the basic documents. He would not know about the secret writings in the spoken Torah. The Mishnah and the Talmud, they would have been amazed, because what was he doing? Okay, remember, I told you, you sat behind, you stood behind your rabbi, and you learned the Torah and the Tanakh and the Mishnah and the Talmud. And after you'd reached a certain level, okay, you can't ask any questions. There's no questions. The Greeks are the question guys. Okay? The Jews are not the question guys. What would happen is this. Okay? Now you're a group of rabbis, fully trained, fully authorized by the rabbi structure. Remember, what did Nicodemus say about Jesus? We know you are a rabbi, right? He was acknowledging his knowledge level. But what a Talmudic rabbi, the high-end rabbi, can do, they sit around in a group, and one of them mentions something in the Talmud. Says, the Talmud says that if we put a rope around Jerusalem, or we put a rope around something, it becomes a court. But we have a little house that's not connected to Jerusalem, that's across the street from La La La. What do we do about that? And they don't debate it. There's no debate that goes on. One rabbi says we should ignore it. One rabbi says, well, extend the rope. One rabbi says, we'll put a separate rope around it. Now, when does it get written into the Talmud? It gets written into the Talmud when all the rabbis in your group go, yeah, we like that. That's a good answer, right? So there's no debate. It's not like the Greek, okay? This is why in all the Gospels, John doesn't really say it. John, this is about the closest that John gets to, is where he says in John, it says, he having not learned, right? What did the other Gospels say?
Spoke as one with wisdom.
With authority, yeah.
Authority.
He spoke with authority. Why? Because he spoke like a Greek guy. In the Greek worldview, I just asked a question. I got an answer. I get good answers. Sometimes we get good answers. Sometimes we get not as good answers. Look, the cool thing is we get answers because then what do? We cogitate it in our brains. We think about it. That's not rabbinical thinking at all. That's not the way it worked. Okay, it wasn't a give and take at all in the way their logic, reasoning, or thinking was. What made Jesus different was he spoke, he did it like the Greeks did. He'd ask a Socratic question. He does it all the time. Who do you say that I am? Right? And sometimes he pounds him, and sometimes he lets him loose. We see this in John all the time, right? He tested Andrew and Philip. He tested them, right? And they didn't give him good answers. And then at the end, we get Simon Peter. Wrong, right? He's wrong. The point in the Greek, though, Greek loves the unstated telos. Matter of fact, Greek really likes. Why do you think the Greeks would like you to make the wrong answer?
Dissect it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Talk
What,
about why it's wrong.
don't we see that? I tell you, we have unstated telos. But the biggest thing we get is you get a question, somebody gives Jesus an answer, may or may not be right. Most of the time when it's wrong, Jesus says, or it's obvious in the text that the answer is wrong, right? And it says it's wrong. What is that telling you to do? Look for the telos. Look for the correct answer, right? And that's what we did. When I gave you the outlines, we go back and we say, Simon Peter, and I just can't remember the exact words he says, but remember, Simon Peter said the wrong thing. He said, Jesus said, I am the logos. I am the logical argument, right? And what did he say? Something. And when Peter reads it back to him, right? You always want to read it back. When he reads it back to him, he says, you are the utterance. That's wrong. That's not what Jesus said. Jesus said, I am the logos. He says, I'm the legai. I'm the logical argument. And what did Peter give him? You're the utterance. Slap, right? And Jesus does that. He did those two things. Andrew says, we don't have enough, there's not enough money to feed these guys. Or Philip, somebody brought the kid to him. But what is, 3 loaves and 2 fishes among all these? It was a wrong answer. Jesus wanted them to go, you're God, you can do it. Give us some manna, Jesus, because we know you're the guy, right? And they are like, fail. The one who didn't fail, my favorite. The woman of Samaritan, the Samaritan woman. The woman at the well did not fail her test. Let's all be like her. And we're going to actually eventually get to the other woman who did not fail her test. The double not fails. But anyway, there's really fun stuff. Thank you, Father, for your word. We pray you look at this week. In your name we pray, amen.